All right. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Can y'all see it okay?
Yep.
Yes,
Got
we
it.
can. Thank you.
Okay. So I found all the videos and the articles that I read really interesting. Some of the things that really stuck out to me was just the theme from from Eric Ries. He talks about this a lot in his book too, but in the video just talking about how entrepreneurs are everywhere and startups are everywhere, and how it really kind of shifted even the way I viewed it, because I've never thought about startups as something that can be done in a large established company or things like that. And so it was just interesting to me to learn about that element and think through entrepreneurs and startups a lot differently than I had in the past. And then also, both Eric Ries and Paul Graham talked about how when you're in that startup process, you don't technically wait until you have like the final product. That your goal is to get something out there as quickly as possible, understanding that you're going to have to be making changes as you go, and you're learning from feedback from consumers, which again I thought was interesting. And that's kind of opposite of maybe what my personality would be, where I would want the finished final product, something solid to release or that I felt confident with. But what they're saying is kind of the opposite, that you try to get something out there sooner, and then make adjustments as you go. And then I also just liked the theme, and there were so many things I liked, but if I'm narrowing it down to three, it was that component about how it's a process of learning from your failure, and that and this was a theme in several of the videos and articles as well, that a lot of startups fail. In fact, one of the individuals said, don't get your hopes up when you're launching a startup, because the odds are that it's not going to be successful, just when you're looking at statistically the number that are. But that there's this theme that when you're learning from your failure, you're applying what you've learned to your process or to your product, that you can be successful in that process. And so, and then Eric Ries making the comment that he's an expert because he's had so many failures. And so I just found that really kind of encouraging, because I think in this, especially with the work that I do, the company I work for, we're tasked a lot with trying to think through what is not out there yet that people need for their behavioral health. And so this kind of gave me just a fresh perspective on how to view those things, and how to maybe challenge myself to take risks, and to really look for opportunities to get something out there and tweak as needed as we learn about what's succeeding and what's not. So again, I learned a lot from these videos and articles, but these were some of the common things that really stuck out to me. So I will stop sharing now. All right.
Okay. I think I am up, so I will go in and share my content. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can everyone see that?
Yep,
we can see it.
Okay. So a few things that really stuck out to me, I really connected to the video from Paul, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Buchheit I'm not sure if that's correct. But this whole concept was very new to me. All of this idea of startups and innovation and all of the things they were talking about, it was all very new concepts, just something I've never actually put a lot of time and thought into. So I really connected to his video the most, I think, out of everything. And so a few things that stuck out to me was, we had his patterns of thoughts. The first one was kill all demon processes. I really enjoyed this. I thought that both he and Steve Jobs both commented and were both discussing how a walk out in nature, and I thought that was interesting that both had the same idea, changed their mindset as so much. They were able to kind of get out, clear their head. Paul Buchheit especially talked about these narratives, these negative narratives, are what actually can limit or even shut down creativity. and getting out into nature and taking a walk or removing yourself from all of the clutter to clear your mind will actually open yourself up to new and better ideas. I thought that was very interesting. The other one he's talked about was yes and thank you. I really connected with this. I think this was an area that I've always had connected with me very much, because I've always felt like gratitude should be first and foremost, even in the times of struggle and trials and failure. There was such a common theme amongst all the readings and all the videos this week of failure, and how we learn from our failures, and how failure was a kind of a starting point for a new idea. Steve Jobs, I felt, just mastered it, and he thrived. It was almost like he thrived on failure. It didn't faze him. Failure was something that to him was just something, okay, next thing. And so I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think of the verse in First Thessalonians, to give thanks in all circumstances. That yes and thank you. Okay, thank you for the lessons learned in the failure, and now let's move on to see to apply them to something different. I thought that was failure being the stepping stone and what drives success was such a common theme, and I connected with that very much. And then the last one that I connected with was the mindset of love what you do. And it was, for him, it was such a it was being present in the here and now. It was such a here and now concept of love what you do rather than do what you love. And I connected with it. It made me think of the chapter in North House of transformational leadership. Transformational leadership is so connected to connecting to the ethics and values of where the company is, where the leader, and also where the other members, the followers of the group are, so that you can use that for that kind of intrinsic motivation to move on. And it just connecting to the idea of allowing the failure, connecting to the why, and letting all of those drive those small decisions, because those small decisions in the long run are going to create long-term movement. So those were a few of the things that really stuck out to me in the reading. So I am going to go back to the group and stop sharing and move on to Becky.
Okay, and I'm gonna, I did this wrong. And then go back, share application. It's not sharing. All right, hold on. Oh, there it is. All right, here we go. Do you see anything?
There it is. Yep.
Needs to be bigger. Hold on. Now can you see it?
Woo-hoo, yep.
Yes.
Still not there. We're getting closer, right? Here we go. I had it up. I don't know why these things disappear on me. Hold on a sec. All right. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for your patience. I had four themes. I agree with both of you that there were a lot of themes, and there were some that stuck out. So I thought the difference between innovation and invention, true invention, that was very striking to me. I really didn't think of inventions as just creating a better light bulb, and innovation being a better mousetrap, and an invention changing industries. So the next point that I thought was very interesting is changing the context is the key to inventing. And Eric Ries speaks to that in the Lean Startup, and so does the Founders School. And then it was in that documentary, the one last thing is that, we moment to moment, we're in our own hallucination. So broadening our thinking and like going out in nature makes a big difference. And the third theme is about the customer. So when we go and get to market quickly, we get to learn what the customer wants and needs instead of being focused on the product. It's focused on what the customer wants, not what the product we have thinks it wants, which was part of my background as I owned businesses, and we would market to the clients. And it's a really new thought to me to send it out, put something out very fast, and then listen to what a customer has to say, instead of spending so much time and money getting ready to send it out. But the last and the part of all of this that was really interesting to me was really the predictions of what's going on. The 4 theories of intensive progress, convergence, where there's a quick rise like with the Industrial Revolution, but then it can decelerate, or a cyclical theory where technology moves in cycles like human beings, and the technology development theory, which is that it yields the AI, so it yields a technology that makes a difference. But the last one was I thought was the most interesting, which was collapse and destruct theory, where technology will be the doom or the end of human beings, of human life. And the example of a computer being told to make the most paper clips ever, all the paper clips possible, who then that computer takes over all of our resources and be damned of human life. So that was really interesting to me. And when I talk to people and ask them what they think about what is going on with this, that computers can actually learn faster than human beings, everybody first expresses how afraid they are, what's going to happen there. So that's what was really interesting to me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hopefully. And move on to Sanjay. Sanjay, is that correct?
Sajin.
Sanjay.
Here we go. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So there were a few things that struck me. I will hit the top 3. The big concept for me was the different definition that they gave to invention and innovation. Just the nuance of specifically 0 to 1 versus 1 to 0, 1 to n. And I thought that was a really great way of saying it, and how much easier it is for us to create invention, take something that exists already and make it better, versus come up with something completely new. I also like the idea where they talked about people love the idea of change until it comes to change. And how the biggest challenge, one of the challenges with innovation can be this idea or this concept of it being so new that people don't like the learning curve. Marketers don't like the learning curve that comes with it. I thought that was an interesting obstacle to innovation as I was looking at it. The second thought that jumped out at me was when they were talking about startups having 3 parts: team, product, and market. And what I saw here was a real science. They had really brought it down to a science. And as I was looking at it, it struck me that, like many sciences, there's also an art that accompanies it. Depending on who you are looking at the startup, you're going to value different things. So the venture capitalists will state that the team is the most important. The engineer will state that the product is most important. The author, though, he made a very compelling argument that the market was the most important. And so I could see just the nuances playing out. It was really neat in terms of watching a startup begin and what things to look at. There's absolutely a process and a structure you can use, but there really is an art that requires an intuition that an individual carries to be able to engage the existing science with what's happening, I think, in the market. Finally, the thing that I was that struck me the most out of all of it was vision. Steve Jobs' vision for what he wanted, and his tenacity to persevere in that vision, I think, was was just striking to me. All of the startups had something very similar. They all carried a vision of what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it. Steve Jobs, though, was a great example to me of a vision-driven man that went and changed the world in so many different ways. And so those are the points that struck me. I will stop sharing at this point and move on to the next share. So Stephanie?
All right. Sorry, my computer is being like really slow for some reason. All right, can y'all see my screen?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, the three things that I would say I took most from the readings and the material this week is that I had grown up on the experience or on the thought that in order to be effective, you have to have experience. And in Mark Anderson's post this week, it reminded me that as important as experience is, it's not necessary to have an effective startup. Going off of Sanjan's thought too, I really, really honed in on the fact that Mark Anderson stressed the importance of a market, of the market where a startup is occurring, rather than the experience of for those who are responsible of the startup. Sorry, still getting over my sickness. The second thing is that Steve Jobs showed that it's okay to live outside of the box. And when we accept the failures that we go through and we think about how we can overcome those, and we open up to the possibility that we can use failure as a means of motivation and learn from our failures, and we are able to see how failing at something does not always equate to being unsuccessful. Instead, like I said, we could use it as a means of motivation and go beyond what we had even thought about doing. The last thing that I had really taken from this was that Paul Graham, and he stresses the importance of being good, and how being good can help have us as a successful startup. He had talked about the company, the blog company, and how he had basically nothing left, and because he was good to his people, there were those people who stood beside him. And being a good leader means that you have to look out for your consumers and make sure that they're satisfied, and making sure that the values and the morale of the company are positive and honest at the same time, which allows the consumers to know that their feedback is heard. You have to be able to listen to your consumers in order to build the supportive relationship with them for the company to be successful. And lastly, I will say that I was one of the ones that assumed that being a good leader meant you had to have a significant amount of financial stability behind you. And I didn't take into consideration where Paul Graham had mentioned that people would much rather support and invest and promote somebody who wants to do good for the consumer, as opposed to only benefiting themselves.
Okay. Elizabeth, can you give us a timestamp?
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left in our time.
We are at 19 minutes and 1 second into our recording.
Perfect.
So I wanted to bring up, I think it's so interesting that it was such a common theme of failure, and that it's motivating. I think that's interesting, and I think we all got that. My question is, that even though we know and we read and we hear, and we even have examples of Steve Jobs, where even Ross Perot told Steve Jobs that's why he invested in Steve Jobs, it's because he didn't stay down, he came back up. But that all sounds good, but how do you really do it? I mean, really, right? I mean, how do you change your mindset, your context, to really make that happen? I think that's the challenge that many people, that leaders face, any kind of leader faces. What do you think?
I was thinking about that in context of the field within which we work. In the realm of technology, there's a lot more money available. And so failure in behavioral health really, I feel like, comes at a lot higher stake because there's not, financials, when you look at the financial state of behavioral health care, there's always restrictions. It's limited. It's being, there's Medicaid cuts, insurance cuts. It's just a constant lobbying and kind of fight for the dollar. So I do think it feels maybe even a little bit different because of that. However, I think that there is something inspirational and motivational about the fact that failure, just because you fail, doesn't mean that that's your destiny. It means that you go back to the drawing board and you figure out where are we missing the mark. And so I thought it was interesting, and then I think that there's also the sense of reality of what the difference in the market is on the behavioral health care side.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that when a lot of the videos and articles were so leaning towards startups of technology and business, and for all of us, we're more in that behavioral health world. And I liked the ideas of applying the lean startup ideas to behavioral health, but I'm still trying to wrap my brain around how do you really transfer all of those concepts to the world where you're dealing with humans, but at the same time we do have budget constraints and we do have policies and legalities, and so a lot of those lean startup concepts can be applied, I think, more easily to the policy and legality portion of how to create systems and create support mechanisms within those. But the concept of failure in dealing with mental health is a little bit to relate those two is that's a little bit harder to wrap my brain around.
As I was thinking about your question, I think in order to manage failure well, you kind of have to internally define it. And whenever I do, so I'm a pastor for a church as well as a clinician, and whenever I try to do something for the church, I can grow so attached to whatever the procedure is or whatever the program is that I forget my vision. And I think it's when I do that failure overwhelms me and that my burnout occurs. There's a certain level of discouragement that just takes me out. I think what I noticed with Steve Jobs was he was attached to his products, but not so much that it came at the expense of his vision. That he kept his vision in mind and that it was his vision that drove him. And I think that's part.
I agree with that.
To me, I'm just like, failure stinks. I don't like it. I don't want it.
Yeah.
But it only stinks depending on how you define it. If failure is a product not going well, then yeah, it will stink. But if you can stay in tune with your vision and stay in step with your vision, and I think that's where many get lost. That's where I get lost personally. I think this is where having those big thinkers is so helpful.
Yeah. I think also going back to that attitude of gratitude, being a Christian allows us to see failure in a different light than possibly someone who doesn't have that component of being able to see the failure within our faith and see the failure within the hope of what Christ has planned for us after that. So I think that's, as a Christian, I see that as a benefit to the way that our mindset and the way that we get to experience failure.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is it's part of the definition, right? It's defining it and defining it as part of the definition. And I think maybe even further than defining the vision, because Steve Jobs, that's a really good point, but his vision was simplicity, the feel of it. It wasn't the product as much. I mean, it was the product. Like you said, he had this idea we can communicate differently. How can we communicate? And that was a process. But the vision of simplicity, that was really his vision. There's more to it, but I think that helps probably, but what you're saying with failure and defining vision as well.
Mm-hmm. We have about 5 minutes left, and I was as two thoughts on I was really fascinated by the voice saying that market is the most important thing. I think a lot of times we think that team is
Yeah.
the most important thing. You know, the people
Yeah.
who we surround ourselves with, like having a motivated team is really important. What did you think about the piece with emphasizing market?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. The idea, and it, if we're going to continue kind of putting it back into the realm that we're all working with more in the behavioral health side, what is that market? Are we talking about the clients? Are we talking about the specific population that of the world that we work with? You know, what is that market, and how, and then defining what that market is.
And that,
Yeah. Go ahead, Becky.
I was going to say, that's really big. I went to an AA meeting or another class today, and it really presenced me too, that everybody comes from a different place, no matter where they end up at the same meeting or the same market. So how do you really define the market in behavioral health? To a term like Steve Jobs actually transform the industry, like a revolutionary definition, like simplicity. It sounds so simple, right? How can you do that with people? You know, I think
And I found myself thinking, like, he went to the lengths of saying the number one killer is lack of market. And in behavioral health, like, your market is so dependent on the community. What are the predominant issues within the community, and really understanding what that is to make sure that your service lines are meeting that need. And so I was just thinking about how there are a lot of behavioral health companies that don't do well because they don't understand their market. That's
Yes.
kind of
right. Well, they're probably a product. I mean, they're thinking about their
Yeah.
team or their product, and those are all. That all is right there when you have people, whether it's clients or employees or.
Yes.
I think behavior.
But it's getting them there.
Yeah. I think defining market for behavioral health is hard and ambiguous because we're at such a primitive stage. I mean, if you think about it, we're just starting. You know, this is things are just, the science itself is just starting, and getting to a clear definition on what the market is challenging. I'm thinking about it right now. I've been thinking about it all week. I don't know what it could be outside of what we've labeled as, you know, people with this particular ailment or that particular ailment or this challenge. Our market is defined by the illness itself and not necessarily by something we could hold on to in a broader way.
yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Stephanie, you might need to turn your mic on.
Oh, I think we lost her. I think she jumped off.
lost
We
her.
have about 2 minutes, a minute and a half to 2 minutes
Yeah.
left. Any final thoughts?
I think that thinking about like it's a startup market and it's no different than when you have a market that's been around for a long time, still thinking outside the box, changing the context
Yes.
is really valuable. You know, I think mental health, it seems to want to be separate from a disease. There is a disease. It's a human being human and has diseases, but it doesn't make up who they are. They're not bipolar.
They're not
They're a person
defined
that
by
has-
it.
You know, it's not defined by that,
Mhm.
right? And even like we're not alcoholic, I'm a person with the disease of alcoholism.
Yeah.
There's a different, so that's my thought about it. That's the challenge.
Stephanie, I know you're getting ready. We have about a minute left, and you're getting ready to before it cut out. Did you want to jump in with something?
Can't see her microphone though. Can you see it?
She said she just sent a message saying that they have some snow and some bad weather, so her internet's not working too good.
Yeah. Oh.
There you are. You're back.
Oh, she's back.
You're back.
Okay, let's see if I can make this last a little bit longer. I would agree with that. I think that the market of behavioral health strictly, it doesn't depend on the community. It depends on the actual disease and the level of the disease and how.
Oh.
Oh.
We lost her again.
All right. Well, we are out of
Stephanie,
time.
why don't you type it out and we can make sure it's added to the notes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, she's not there. Okay.
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 Well, we're out
Yeah.
of time. We are. So
Okay.
thank you all for the discussion. I wish we had more than 30 minutes, honestly. It's a good conversation, but
Yes.
I enjoyed getting to talk with you all about.
Yeah. Great conversation. Thank
Great
you.
conversations. Yes. Thank you all. Enjoy your Saturday, everyone.
Yes, you too.